everyone. Thank you so much for coming to Zibby's tonight. Thank you for a lot of familiar faces. So happy to see you all here. We're very excited to welcome Emily Oster and celebrate her new book, The Family Firm. So congratulations on the release. And she is here tonight in conversation with Dr. Cara Natterson. So I'll do a quick bio for both of them, but it'll be about a 30-minute conversation. We'll open it up to a nice Q&A and then plenty of books to buy and sign. But Emily Oster is on a mission to empower parents by providing the data and tools they need to make confident decisions. After getting a PhD in economics from a little-known school called Harvard, Emily went on to pursue research in health economics and now works as a professor of economics at another small school, Brown University. As a mom of two, she was inspired by her own pregnancy and the lack of clear information to guide her decisions, from prenatal testing to induction. She decided to use her economics background to review and analyze the data on pregnancy and parenting and write a book to help other parents navigate these topics. In addition to being a professor, Emily is the founder and CEO of Parent Data, a data-driven guide to pregnancy, parenting, and beyond. Emily is also a New York Times bestselling author whose books include Expecting Better, Crib Sheet, and The Family Firm, most recently. And most recently, The Unexpected. She has sold over 1 million copies thus far. And Dr. Cara Natterson is a leading voice in puberty and adolescent health, a pediatrician, speaker, and the co-host of This Is So Awkward podcast. She's the author of 10 books, including the best-selling This Is So Awkward, Modern Puberty Explained, and the New York Times best-selling The Care and Keeping of You series. When her own kids started puberty, Cara found Less Awkward, the first company aimed at making puberty less cringy and more comfortable with both product and content. Cara graduated also from Harvard College and Johns Hopkins Medical School and trained at UCSF. She has 2 college-age kids and currently lives in Los Angeles. So thank you both for coming. And we also want to give a special shout out to Tumbleweed for sponsoring this event and providing free copies of Emily's book tonight for everyone. And a special thank you to Tumbleweed's owner and director, Liz Kimmelman, who is also here tonight. So thank you and enjoy.
All right.
Can I kick
ready?
it off?
Let's do it.
Okay. The last time I saw Emily in person was in Rhode Island.
Yes.
And I'd come up from New York. I was on my way to Boston. I stopped to have coffee with you, and there was an earthquake on the East Coast that day.
Right.
Remember that? Right.
Vaguely. I remember the coffee.
That was the highlight of the day. But it's like, so hopefully,
I see. This is a lead up to hopefully there not be an earthquake.
Exactly.
I thought there was going to be a
got
question.
Okay. No question about that. Just
no
a
question.
statement. Okay. But we like to hang out virtually usually. So being in person is really a treat. Okay. I'm going to give you a little framing. I wrote down some notes to give the framing. Emily's really funny. I'm funny. So I just needed to frame it so that I could keep up with Emily. Okay. So I don't know about you, but everywhere I turn lately, the headlines are screaming. Like on my Apple News, there are 4 stories and there's always at least one horror story, right? And there's real horror in the world and there's a lot going on, but I'm kind of over the negativity. So when Emily and I were trying to figure out what we were going to talk about, we decided we would have a conversation about stress. There's a lot of data around stress, and there's a lot of stress in all of our lives. There's also a physiologic response in your body to stress. There is a physiologic response in the bodies of kids to stress. Stress makes us not just feel not so good, but it actually impacts our bodies in really negative ways. The CNN news alert I got while I was writing these notes was Monica Lewinsky has 25 ways to calm the F down between now and the election. Literally.
I was like, I gotta know what they are.
Yes. So I did not click on that, but I'm just saying. So here's the good news. The good news is that we have the data queen, Emily. She's my data queen, who's going to talk to us about some of the data around stress. I can chime in about the body stuff when appropriate, but the good news is that we're not just going to yell screaming headlines at you. What we're going to do is actually give you suggestions and tools and tips to be able to navigate the climate that we're living in so that you leave here with your shoulders up just a little bit lower and feeling a little less overwhelmed. How's that for framing?
That's good frame. Yeah, if we can accomplish that.
And then we can read Monica's article.
And then we can read Monica's article.
Yes.
Yeah, extra time.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to start here. We're going to start with the Surgeon General.
Surgeon General.
And
He's worried.
He's worried. He's worried about parents. So can we talk about it a little bit, and can you go through that data?
Yeah, so okay. So you saw the Surgeon General warning that parents are very stressed. And I think there's been a lot of, look, you got to wonder, like, what does the Surgeon General do? What is the point of a Surgeon General warning? Like, it has no actual implications, and he knows that. And I think the main point is to make people pay attention to something. I think the interesting part of that conversation has been understanding how much of this stress is something that is about, say, policy, how much of the stress is something about parents imposing. And for me, I think what's quite interesting and quite important to separate. So if you look at the data and you asked, let's say the best data set we have on this probably is a data set called the BARFIS. This is what it's called, behavioral risk factors. People call it the BARFIS. And the BARFIS looks at data on, they ask people like, how many bad mental health days have you had? And there's some other things that are kind of measures of stress. And if you look at those data, parents are more stressed than non-parents. And that has been true forever. And it's gotten a little bit worse over time. So I think that piece is a little bit right. But the most important thing for stress is poverty. So if you asked like which thing is better, to be a parent who is like middle income or a non-parent who is poor, from a stress standpoint, it's much better to be a parent who's middle income. The effects of socioeconomic status totally swamp the effects of parenting, and the effects of parenting are there in all these groups. So I think like that's where I felt like some of the conversation around the stress thing has missed a little bit, sort of the part that's relevant for most people, which is like, if your family life is not stable and you don't know how to find a roof over your head and you don't have enough food, like those things are really very stressful, much more stressful than like the kinds of stress that we're putting on parents. Now, at the same time, there's this other conversation, which I think is interesting. It's probably more relevant for people in this room, which is about like, how are we making the lives of people who have a lot of resources more stressful by telling them they're doing a shitty job? Sorry. And that, I think that is a piece, and that's a piece that a lot of people have talked about and that had sort of, I think, is relevant and maybe is new, but is quantitatively not as important as this other piece. And I guess somehow that feels to me like it's missed from this conversation.
Okay, so I want to get to that big piece in a second, but let's start with the second half of your answer. So are kids stressing their parents out, or is the world's judgment of parenting stressing parents out?
I think what is stressing parents out, in my like experience of listening to people and looking at what we see in the data and thinking about what is different, what is stressing people out is the constant perception that everything that you do might be the worst thing that could happen. So like this hurried child thing is like my most classic recent example. It drives me out of my mind. So this is the thing where people are like, if you rush your kid out the door, you'll cause anxiety. If you tell them that they have to put their shoes on fast, like that's right. And then that means, and you sort of like, haha, that's funny. But actually the number of people who write to me and they're like, you know, did I ruin my kid? I'm always telling them to put their shoes on. It's like, of course you are. You have to leave, you know? And so I think, but it's like, it's in people's head, and it affects the way that you process everyday interactions, every opportunity. It's like every time you talk to your kid, it's not an opportunity to do better or just whatever, something neutral. It's like every time I might be ruining them forever. And that is a very stressful experience. Because most of the time, that's very stressful.
But isn't it because we're branding every second of parenting? And isn't that like...
Yes, no, I think the issue is that we have...
titles out?
You don't want to have Lighthouse. Lighthouse parenting is the best one.
I don't want snowplow. I don't want intensive. I don't want any of it.
Lighthouse, that's a new one.
You're like this?
No, this is like, so I get this email from CBS this morning. It's like, will you come on to talk about Lighthouse parenting? I have never heard of this. And they were like, will you come on? I was like, absolutely. Yes, I'll look it up. And it was just like some made up thing it was nothing. It was not like interesting. But it's just like, yeah, that's a new one.
Yeah.
It's a new one.
Okay, so we're going to rebrand. By the end of this half hour, we will have a new brand.
The idea, yes, we don't need to, I think the labeling is unhelpful, but also this kind of idea that there's these different ways to parent, you have to pick them and you have to like do them.
I mean, here's a dirty little secret from a pediatrician. There is no right way.
And most of the things that you do don't matter very much.
Correct.
And I don't know if that's reassuring or disappointing.
And the scarring thing, like the thing you do that, like the thing that your parent did that you have taken with you for 30 years, they had no idea they were doing it at the moment. They weren't even conscious of the comment that came out of their mouth or the thing they did. So like, I know my kids are now 19 and 21, and I spent the last 2 decades wondering, is that the thing that she's going to carry with her for her whole life? Like, I'll never know, but and sometimes I check in with her now and ask her what was the scarring.
My daughter told me, I told her about this hurried child thing, and she was like, I'm a person who gets anxious sometimes. Like, of course, you're related to me. And she was like, and you used to tell me that we would be late a lot. And now I'm always worried about being late. And I was like, that's correlation. You're worried about being late because I'm worried about being late. And that's why I told you we weren't going to be late. It's not because, anyway, it's not causal. That's my point. And that's probably what she'll carry along with her. She'll be like, remember that time you yelled at me on the way to school?
Exactly. Okay. So now let's go to the bigger, the more important point, which is the socioeconomic drivers and poverty being associated really with the worst outcomes. And I think it's important here to stop and talk about ACEs. Do you guys know about ACEs? So ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. These are the things that have been, they're measurable entities that impact the physical, social, and emotional outcomes for growing kids. They are things like witnessing trauma, food insecurity, housing insecurity. These are big picture social ills. These are big things that no human should have to deal with these things. But if you're being raised in homes where you are on the front lines, witnessing these things or experiencing these things, experiencing abuse or witnessing it, they really do dramatically impact the way you grow up. They actually change your puberty. Kids who experience 4 or more ACEs enter puberty earlier. There's clear data. We understand why. It has to do with cortisol coursing through their veins constantly. Their cortisol levels are high because they're stressed. They're stressed because they're living with ACEs. So I would love to understand, I don't want to make the mistake of correlation and not causation, but is it fair to say that that's really what's underlying it with poverty is just ACEs?
Yeah, I think basically the causality on those things is very strong. And I think it's sort of worth thinking about the idea that 2 things could be true. So we say often like 0 to 3 is the most important time. And that's like, there's a sense in which that's true. Like that's a very formative time. And it's not that kids cannot recover from bad experiences in that, but that's really important. And it's also true, we get kids in preschool or we get them in kindergarten, there are already really big inequalities in, whether kids are ready for school, and those things are then going to follow them. And that has to do with all of this stuff. But it can both be true that 0 to 3 is really important in terms of some of these basic foundational things, and that there are a lot of good ways to do 0 to 3, and that there's many approaches to parenting that avoid these ACEs that are different. I think we sort of conflate those a bit. You tell people the most important thing is 0 to 3, and they come away thinking, well, that means like I have all these opportunities to ruin my kid. But actually the most important thing is 0 to 3, but you're already doing all the things, which is something I tell people all the time. That basically like by the time you're down the road and you're explaining to me like this preschool has this more wooden toys than this other preschool, like it's done. Like your kid is not experiencing the things that are a problem. You just pick the preschool that's close to you. Or for an easier commute.
100%.
And I think that's just like, that's hard for people to hold both of those things.
So I want to end each little segment with a hopeful note, with something. So like, let's just go there for a second before we move to the next topic. What is to combat the anxiety around parenting that the Surgeon General worries about and is talking about? I know my advice. I don't know what your advice is.
Don't think so much about it. Stop thinking about that.
And put your phone down.
Put your phone down. That's good. Yes. Yeah. One of the things I will say, I put a pin in the put your phone down, because I think one of the things that is very stressful is that like people, it's one thing if you go out and look for information. That's like sort of bad enough. But at least if you're going out to look for some information, you've decided you're ready to get that information, you're asking a specific question, you're maybe able to go to like sources that you actually trust and will give you like a reasonable answer that you want to listen to. The problem, I think, with the kind of social media version of this is you're just like tootling along, trying to watch Ballerina Farm tell you about her protein powder, and like think about if you want to buy that. And then all of a sudden there's a reel that's like did you know when you drop your kid off at daycare, they think you're dead? They're like, oh my God, what, should I buy more protein powder? And I think that's like that's very stressful. That's very stressful. Those are literal, actual, real. I just want to be clear. I am not making those up. Both of those things are true.
They are. You can hold two things to be true, and those two things are true.
Yeah, true.
Okay. So that's, I feel like we're done with
$67.
topic one,
Okay.
and we're going to move on now.
Mhm.
Okay. I want to talk about short and long-term impacts of the day-to-day stressors, the things that sort of stress us out a little bit or annoy us versus the big acute stressors, the big. So can you help build kind of a grid for us of how to place these things? Because sometimes it's really hard to, well, my adrenal glands are going to pump out cortisol, whether I've got the pasta cooking an extra minute or someone is, driving their car through my garage and into my kitchen, right? Like same physiologic bottom line. So how does the data sort the day-to-day stressors, chronic, those big acute ones, the long-term and the short-term effects? Or does
I think
it
this
not?
is more of a question for you. I mean, I think that so perhaps I will put it back on you. I think that, we know from again, the sort of same kind of evidence that it is long-term chronic, that chronic stress is a different thing from acute stress. And I think it's probably worth putting a pin in for kids, like some stress is okay. I think we sort of we've gotten into some kind of conversation that's like, I never want my kid to be unhappy. I don't want them to be stressed. And it's like, it's fine for your kid to be stressed. Like that's part of life, like part of being a person. It's like there are stressful events. Sometimes the pasta cooks too long. Sometimes you have a test and like, it's stressful. And like, you want to do well because that's part, and that's, you can be nervous about it. Like stress is an experience that we all have that is part of like, we are designed to have some of that. And I think it's the sort of stress that is constant and is unpredictable. And this is even if you talk about kind of what kinds of things stress kids out. A lot of it is sort of lack of consistency about big picture things, not sort of small moments. So I think I think people worry too much. My guess is that people worry too much about occasional stress.
My husband's here and he's a cardiologist, and I'm going to get this wrong. So Paul, correct me if I got this wrong, but there's this phenomenon in cardiology called the Starling curve.
And you put this in your notes. I had to look it up.
Yeah.
It's in the airplane.
Okay. I had to look it up too.
Okay, good.
Okay. Because I hadn't really thought about it in 10 years, but it really felt like it was appropriate. So a Starling curve there's this thing that happens in your heart where your heart muscle, contracts, right? Every beat. And as the blood volume increases or the fluid increases that's coming into the heart, the more fluid that's coming to the heart, tell me if I'm getting this right, the heart pumps more effectively. Like it does a better job with more fluid until a point where there's so much fluid in there that it actually can't pump effectively. And it just does this. Is that decent? Oh. He's funny like you. So I feel like stress is like that because there's really good data that small amounts of stress are incredibly helpful. They're motivating. Like what got you to finish your book?
Right.
And turn it in. You had a deadline.
Yeah.
That's a little stressful, right?
Yeah.
Everything we have stressors in our life every day that are designed to get us to be functional and then to do things. And it's when you hit that tipping point. And this is where I was curious if there really was data, because sometimes that tipping point is one huge stressor, the loss of a loved one or something catastrophic happening. But frankly, sometimes the tipping point is all the 1,000 tiny paper cuts. Right?
So the piece of data this makes me think of, which is around pregnancy. So people will sort of worry about stress in pregnancy. And there actually is a little bit of evidence that very large stressful events, basically the loss of a very close family member during pregnancy, does have some very small sort of long-term impacts you can detect on kids. You can only see them in huge samples. So this isn't like panic about this, but you do see some of this kind of very stressful events translating in utero, but you don't see anything like that for sort of normal. So people sometimes dream, they'll be like, well, my job is very stressful. It's like, well, that's, yeah, sure. But like, that's not the kind of stressful event that we're talking about that's having these very large spikes in cortisol, which then might have some impact. So I think there's a kind of parallel there.
And just like as a takeaway, you can't control the catastrophes, but I think you can catastrophize less, because I think that's to the screaming headlines, like everything is being catastrophized. And the number of wooden toys at a preschool is a perfect example of catastrophizing a nothing burger. And it's truly not helpful, because it'll take you over the tip of the Starling curve.
For no reason.
For no reason.
Save your stress time for actual
There we go.
stresses.
By the way, new headline just came in. Starved to death at home.
No,
you can't make this
you
up.
can't
Like,
read that one. That was not
okay.
good.
Yeah.
That was not a good headline.
Okay.
Let's stick
Are
with
the
Monica.
things, this is sort of I'm going to skip this one. I'll come back to it. Can we talk about hormones and stress?
I would be delighted to.
Okay. Do you want to just go? Let's talk about
No, I think you should tell me, what hormones are we most interested
I'm
in?
interested in pregnancy and hormonal shifts in pregnancy and stress. I can share a little bit about hormones in puberty and stress, and maybe we could talk about whether the data is the same. Okay.
Yeah.
So puberty starts now between 8 and 9 for girls and between 9 and 10 for boys. It's a lot younger than it ever was. And the first sign of puberty is a slamming door. Truly. Then come the breast buds. And it's because the hormones what's happening is there are hormonal peaks and valleys on the order of hours. So there's hormonal looping that goes from the brain. The brain releases hormones like LH and FSH. They go down to the ovaries if you have them, or testicles if you have them, and tell those organs to release their hormones, right? Estrogen and progesterone from the ovaries, testosterone from the testicles. Those hormones rise, give the brain a signal, we're good. Turn off LH, turn off FSH, those dive, then estrogen dives or testosterone dives. So you see the roller coaster that you are living in your home, the royal you, not you, Emily, ever. But also that roller coaster, it happens every 6 or 8 or 10 hours. You go from peak to valley. And our valleys are the same low as our kids, but their peaks are much higher. We don't reach the same hormone levels, but different in pregnancy. We don't reach the same hormone levels that they do. And so the delta between the high and the low is greater when it drops. Their brain is experiencing that shift because the hormones circulate around the brain. That's the mood swing that we see. It feels horrible to the kids. It's like, feels terrible. They hate it. Even when it's not drama or sadness, if it's laughing uncontrollably, if it's being silly, if it's acting out, if it's making bad decisions, it feels terrible. And this is a stressor. It is a stressor for families, and it is a stressor for kids, because if they don't understand what's happening in their body, they behave wrong. I say wrong intentionally, like they're breaking the rules, or their teacher is disciplining them, or they're letting down their adults in some way, and it feels bad, and they perceive that bad feeling as being stressful. And so I'm sort of curious if there is any data around sort of, especially pregnancy, since you've done so much work there, where we see surges and shifts in hormone there and stress.
So it's the same. I mean, it's the same hormones, right? It's the sort
Identical.
of same hormones in puberty. And this is the thing I think we perhaps could do a better job explaining to people. Like, it's the same hormones in puberty that it is in pregnancy. It's sort of a slightly different combination of them. And then it's the same hormones in perimenopause and menopause that are kind of moving around. And so I think it's like, these are the 3 times in women's life where like your hormones are, there are more of them.
Yes.
And I think that we could. And it's going to have some of the same kinds of impacts, because a lot of postpartum, a lot of, in pregnancy, mood swings, depression, just general, like, one of the questions I get almost all the time is people who are like, I'm weaning. Mm-hmm. Why am I so depressed? It's like, yeah, because your hormones are like they're changing. Like, this is a sort of change, and then you wean, and there's a period in which things are fluctuating a lot, and you feel like you're 13.
And the world has lots of judgments about
and the world has lots of judgments. Yes. And people are also being mean. Exactly. Yes. So I think that we could overall just try to, I don't know, scaffold. I think people would be less anxious about this if they understood it better. Is like my core belief is like, if people understood things that were happening in their bodies better, it would make them more relaxed about them. And the basic idea of like, you have this set of hormones and they're moving in these different ways throughout your life cycle. And this is the time they're going to be most crazy. And this is the time in which they're going to be less crazy, is something we could start in puberty. And then we could just, then we would have the base to explain to people, okay, now it's perimenopause. Remember that lesson I gave you about puberty? It's the same kind of thing.
And it does feel very similar.
It's too bad when you have it at the same time as the teens. It's unfortunate that they happen at the same time.
It's an amazing collision course that
It's
happens
bad.
in so many homes. Yes.
It's very bad.
Yes. Especially because puberty takes a whole decade. So at
Right.
some point, right? At some point.
And perimenopause also takes a whole decade. So there's got to be some overlap.
Correct. In fact, I think most people would put perimenopause now at like 15 years. They would call it like 35
starts
to
at
40.
35 and then
Yes.
you're just, it
And
just
keep on
keeps going.
It just keeps
Good luck,
on going.
everybody.
Exactly.
Great.
But here's a good positive take-home message.
Okay.
If you know about it and you educate yourself, then at least you can understand what those high highs and low lows are at. And
And I think for your kid, I think the other thing is for like understanding that with your kid in puberty lowers the stress some, because it's so surprising
yes,
and so anxiety. Like, what happened to my kid? Like, are they sick? Like, are they broken? Like, because then it's so, and it's
so on and on.
And I think it helps you in parenting to recognize, okay, it's not that my kid hates me forever. They just hate me. Like, I just got to wait it out for like 40 minutes.
Yeah.
And
or
then
6 years, but it passes. It really does. It does pass. I think a lot of parents are worried about mental health emergencies in their kids because that exists too. Like, I don't want to blow off all of this and say it's all hormonal surges and drops. So I want to like make sure I'm clear about that. And the data there is shocking. The amount of mental health urgency certainly among our tweens and teens is massive right now. But if what you're seeing is this every few hours, that's hormones. Like, mental health stuff tends to stretch over much longer periods of time. Okay, let's do one more and then we'll take questions.
Yeah.
Is there data about altruism? Like, if I help you cope with your stress, does my stress go down?
So I think the book I would draw on for this, and I think that the data on this is the idea of mattering, which people talk about. Jennifer Wallace has talked about in her recent book, which I think is quite compelling around this idea that kids benefit from thinking that they're important, and not thinking they're important like by you telling them they're so important, but thinking they're important by you saying, like, by them, there being something for them to do that helps somebody else, that has some positive impact, that has is a way in which they
matter.
In which they matter. And that's the thing that, like, a core element that all people need is to matter to somebody else. That's like one of the things that we like as people. And I think this has come up, and the reason why Jennifer's book was so important on this is that some of the more intensive ways that we parent don't leave space for that, because it's like, well, your job is to get straight A's, and to your job is to invest in productive activities about achievement. And that is important in some ways. I don't want to discount that is something that's important, but when we take everything out of their way so they can focus only on that, there's no opportunities for them to do things for other people, because it's like, well, my whole job is to study for this test, and there isn't any space to make dinner because somebody's out of town, or make sure that my brother gets to camp because I need to help with that. There's just no space for that because you have to be studying all the time, or you have to be whatever, doing sports all the time or something. And I think that there's a sense in which thinking a little bit about this also being an important thing for kids' mental health, for the way that we process ourselves in the world.
And so if someone else matters, then you
matter.
Yeah. Her book is called Never Enough.
Never Enough. It's
amazing.
So it's a really, really great book.
Phenomenal.
Yes. Highly recommended.
Yeah. High recommend.
Yeah.
Do you have any pearls before we take questions?
No questions.
Okay. Questions.
We already did all my pearls, which is don't think about it so much.
And don't be on your phone.
Don't be on. No, I wouldn't really. I mean, yes. Don't watch things on your phone. Yes. Don't let your phone get you. That's it.
All right. Who's got a question? Yeah.
What do you think is affecting the hormonal, or like, I guess maybe, do you think the hormonal shifts in puberty is something that is more extreme in like current climate? Or has this always been those highs and lows? I mean, obviously
Yeah.
to an extent, I'm sure, but
Good
what
question.
do you think is like environmentally adding to that?
So puberty has always been about high highs and low lows. That's how it has always worked in the body. But for the past 25 years, it's been marching back earlier and earlier. We know that. So, and it's stretching out longer. And the question is why? And the leading answer, there are three big bucket answers. The leading answer is stress. And generally speaking, it's the ACEs type stressors, although all of these stressors that we've talked about do make cortisol production elevated. And we were designed to be like chased by a lion or a tiger and have cortisol go way up for a minute, and then we're out of there, and then our cortisol levels, bless you, our cortisol levels drop, right? With all of these stressors, high cortisol levels all the time are changing the physiology of the body. So that's a big one. A second one is antibiotics in our food supply. It's not antibiotics that I would give you if you have an ear infection. It's antibiotics that are going into cattle feed and poultry feed that then trickle down through our entire food chain, and they actually cause local inflammation in the intestines of the people who consume those foods, not just the meat products, but also the the vegetables that are grown on the land that is fertilized with, et cetera, et cetera. And that is changing the way that hormones work in the body, and it's tipping puberty a little bit earlier. There's a lot more data coming out about this. Is very interesting. And then the third big bucket are the 1,000 endocrine disrupting chemicals that you hear about and read about. And there's one that was written up about 4 weeks ago called musk amberette. It's what is put into cosmetics to make them smell musky or smell something. And it's not on the label because it's trade secret, it's fragrance. But it's the first chemical that has been directly connected with triggering puberty in the brain at the level of the hypothalamus. So lots of things. So the answer is, this is the world we live in. This is what's happening. We can fight hard to change a lot of these things. But the other thing to do is just acknowledge that it's here and it's real. And if you see a third grader who is acting like someone used to act in 7th grade, that's puberty.
I think they're coping mechanisms at such a younger age.
They don't have them.
Yeah,
that's the problem. That's the problem. Their brains are not developing faster. Yeah.
Vis-a-vis that question, is it more prevalent in America than other places around the world? Like some countries in Europe, they use fresher produce and yada, yada, yada.
If you had asked that question 10 years ago, the answer was yes. Today, the answer is no. Even though Europe is much better on the antibiotic front and much better on knowing what ingredients are in every product, but the data is now global.
So I'm thinking about the wellness industry that is multi-trillion dollars, I think, compared to even the healthcare industry, which is less than that, which is insane. And I'm curious if there is any meaningful data on areas where people are more well, because we all are doing all the things all the time. Some of them are great. Some of them are like acupuncture to try and manage hormones after postpartum and all these things, right? Which can make you feel better. But I'm curious if there is actually any meaningful data on more well. Is anyone more well?
I mean, so life expectancy gains have stalled, but that's not probably for, I mean, so look, obesity has gone up a lot, and it is there are a lot of metabolic comorbidities of obesity. It's separate from saying BMI is somehow health deterministic, but fundamentally the increase in obesity has not been good for wellness. Right? Yes.
Correct.
Okay. I'm just checking. So that is a pretty important piece of the world. And so if you ask what's the wellness innovation that might help in the next decade, it's GLP-1s. Because fundamentally, I think that there's a lot of evidence that if people were less obese, they would be healthier. Much of the stuff that people are doing in what you are describing as a wellness industry, like acupuncture or this, that, and the other thing. Probably the effects of those things are very small. Like, are they zero? They could be not zero.
They could be negative.
They could be negative. They could be negative.
Are.
Sometimes they're negative. Sometimes they're positive. Most of that stuff is probably not mattering beyond the like basic, you know, like it's good to exercise and like eat vegetables.
Yeah, I mean, I would say
Fiber.
the blue zones,
Eat
there's some
fiber.
data around the blue zones and what they do, but it's longevity data. It's
Yeah.
not, so that's, I think it's like, I agree. It's hard to, you're asking
training.
a more
strength
complicated
training
question
is
than that.
good.
Strength training
is good.
Sleep. I mean, the sleep data is really clear
Yeah,
and
that's
that's free. It turns out it's a free intervention that you can do. And it's very clearly linked with quality of life and longevity. So
I think a place I find very interesting is in like I'm very interested in elite athletics because of my goals to be an elite athlete. They're failing miserably, but I feel like so there's a lot of research in elite athletes about like things that cause tiny performance gains. And there is some like interesting stuff there where you're like, but when you look at like how important is this? You know, like it's not important in the sense of like it's going to help you live longer or be well if you're like a person of sort of basic
Like cryotherapy.
right, exactly. It's like or like, you know, ice baths or like and so there's like crazy stuff that people do for performance gains, which you could, but like that's not gonna I don't know, it just doesn't matter.
and every single one of these interventions might work for some people.
Sure.
Might do nothing for some people.
Might be bad for some other
someone
people.
always ends up in the ER from an ice bath or whatever, right? So it's like
It's like, yeah, that's a horrible ice bath is a terrible experience. Okay, more on ice baths. Yes.
Not ice.
No, yes, okay, not ice baths.
I wanted to go back. You guys were mentioning Jennifer Wells' book Never Enough, which I read recently. It's amazing. I highly recommend. So there's obviously a lot of data on the impacts of achievement and overscheduling and too much. Liz can attest to this. My son has no interest in doing anything.
Super.
He's in second grade. Other than tumbleweed, I should say. It's like the only thing he happily and willingly does. So thank God for tumbleweed. But I guess you've always helped Emily parent me and other parents like decide what hill to die on every day. So like this extracurricular thing and having after school activities. I know very clearly the data shows like it's bad to overschedule and do too much. But what about the opposite? What about doing too little, and how does that impact them socially, or just other skills that you develop, like being away from home, being with others, having other mentors, learning other skills? Like, what's the flip side of that coin if they're not doing anything?
I mean, I think, you know, there are some, we look at like the evidence on extracurriculars, which is mostly comes from places, from sort of settings in which the extracurriculars that we're doing are very, like the good evidence comes from like, we put an extracurricular in the middle of the school day. We like told people they could join a club. And most of that is like, actually that can be very good for like socio-emotional development and for kids feeling like they're belonging because, you know, math isn't going well, but I get to go to like Rubik's Cube club and like, I love Rubik's Cubes and it's like, that's where my people are, you know? But the thing that makes that valuable is that the kid that they like it, that they've like chosen something that they like. So I think one organizing principle is like, whatever thing you pick for this, if you decide it should be something your kid likes, because going every week to some activity they hate is kind of defeating the independence purpose. And the sort of like developing independence, there's a bunch of ways you can do that, which I think is an important part of things outside the home, is like a less scaffolded environment, but like it's what summer camp's for, you know? So I'm not sure that at this stage I would do anything except wait for him to say like something he might be interested in.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of data on boredom and free play.
Yeah.
And the benefits of boredom and free play, like a lot. And it feels hard in a world where everyone signs up for things, carpools and goes together. It's all adult, organized and driven and structured and coached. And
you feel bad.
You feel bad. But the pediatric data is very clear that when kids are given time and space to be bored, and when they make up the rules on their own for their play, and when they organize the play on their own without an adult, those kids are happier by every measure, immediately and down the road. Sometimes the free play doesn't work out so well and they get in a fight and whatever, but that's part of the learning and the discomfort, and it's the skill that they're building. So the question though is also, if everyone else is doing X and you're the only one doing Y. You know, there was a good daily about free range parenting recently. I don't know if you listened, and it was like, you can't have the only kid who's being a free range kid, because that sort of becomes a lonely experience, right? It's the same
And the pressure on
question.
the parent, it's like they get home from school at 2:00, they don't have activities.
That's right.
It's expected them to entertain themselves for 6 hours.
That's right.
And I can't entertain.
Yeah, and I think that's where you would say, okay,
That's
the thing that works, like a thing that works for our family is a different schedule, in which, like, for an hour in the afternoon, you're gonna do an activity, and here are 3 activities you could pick from. Like, which one of these sounds good? Because actually, like, this isn't working for our schedule.
Yeah,
it's, arts, music, whatever. I don't know what the activities
but
are you guys have here.
It's like everything else in parenting. Once you figure out what's going to work right now, it's like whack-a-mole. And then the schedule changes, or the interest change, or the weather changes, or whatever it is. And so it's, even if you figure it out today, in a year, it'll be right back there.
That's true. That's correct.
You said that teens are unhappy, or there's like a mental health crisis. So do we know exactly why? Like, I hear it's social media, it's cell phones, and I just wanted to know your thoughts.
Yes, and
Yes. It started well before COVID. The data is very clear there. COVID exacerbated it. I mean, I don't know how long your kids were out of school. All of our kids were out of school 16 months here.
my kids were out of
That's
school for 2.5 months. They went back September 4th, 2020.
That's incredible.
Rhode Island. What?
Incredible.
Yeah.
Love it. We were out 16 months, and that took a toll. We know. Social media, certainly, there's lots of data around social media that's negative. There's lots of data around social media that's positive, especially for marginalized kids who find community. So you gotta,
I don't think that stuff is as clear as like, I mean, I think that like, if you said like on average, like, what do we know about social media? It's almost all correlations. In the causal data we have, maybe there's a little bit of an average negative, but like the heterogeneity is so big that I think this sort of claim, I mean, I've talked to John Haidt about this directly. I think this claim that like, the entire like problem with kids' mental health is, phones and social media, I think is an overstatement. I think sleep is important. And this is the sense in which I worry about phones, not so much the kind of like what you're doing on your phone, but that literally like the phone is fun. I mean, we know the phone is fun. And so you're sticking around on your phone instead of going to sleep. And we know the sleep matters for mental health. It's like super important. And so that's a place where, I don't know.
To that point,
and it's gone down a lot over time.
It has. And the kids newborns need 14 to 16 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period, right? Then by the time they get to toddler years, it's like 12 to 14 hours. Then by the time they get to kindergarten, all the way through high school, kindergartners need 10 plus or minus, every kid's different. High schoolers still need 9. They still need 9. Like, anyone who says differently is just choosing to believe their own truth. They just can't get it. It's really hard to get it. And so like, start tonight to get your devices out of your room for you. Like, yes, and your kids, but if they don't have devices yet, great, then they'll never be in their room. But get your own devices out of the room. There's so much evidence that my phone is on silent mode. If it's next to me and it vibrates, it disrupts my deep sleep. And it's not just sleep, it's runs of deep sleep that we need in order to be restorative, to file our memories away for the day, to be able to reset our mood. For kids, it's when they grow when they sleep. That's all you need to say to a 10-year-old is like, you grow when you sleep. And they're like, I'm going to bed. Very true. But that is sleep hygiene vis-a-vis technology and iPad and computer, like all of it out of your room.
But I think the short answer is there is no one answer to this, and I'm not sure we even know all of the possible answers. Right, should we take one more question and then we do book signing? Okay, yes, Cara's husband. Yeah.
She talked, I get to hear her speak all the time, so I'll direct this one. For people who may not have, I guess this is sort of directed at an audience that does have the privilege of like reading books like yours and has the time to think about these things. But, I think most parents are starving for a roadmap. And what they're increasingly hearing is that there's not a roadmap. And that, it's certainly not a one size fits all, but there's enormous stress as people try to follow what they believe or what they're reading is the right way to go. But I sort of wonder also if the stress of being told that there is not a one size fits all may be greater. So how do you balance this?
It is a really interesting question because I think that part of what is different now is used to be there was just this way you did it. It was like the way your parents did it, the way the people around you did it, we're just like all doing the same thing. And like whether that maybe that was good, maybe it was not good, but whatever, it was what we did. And this idea of, families have gotten smaller, extended family is more often distant. People are kind of making it for themselves. And so you're supposed to like come up with your own plan without some defaults. And I think that is hard. I also think it is true that people differ quite a lot in whether they find that helpful or challenging, right? I think this is the part of the tension. Like some people would just like to be told. Like sometimes I think I talk to a lot of doctors about how they want to deal with their patients, and sometimes they'll be like, look, a lot of my patients, they just want me to tell them what to do. And so now I'm trying to do shared decision making with them, but like they don't want to share decision making. They just want me to tell them what to do. And like that would be so much easier. And then there are people who are like, why aren't my patients listening to me? They want to talk about doing their own research and doing it. And so there's like a balance there that is very specific to individuals, which I think is hard for a provider even to kind of figure out how to navigate. I'm not sure there's really a solution to this, because by providing the information that one of those groups needs, then the other group sort of like is forced to consume that information. I don't know. It's not a very good answer.
It's a good answer. I feel like if we just judged each other less, it would make it easier for everyone.
That would be, yeah. I have we have a nanny, like she's not really a nanny because my kids are big, but like we have a person who like is in our house all the time, and she is having a baby, which is super exciting. It's her first kid, and somebody was like, she must ask you so many, like that must be so great for her. And I was like, I don't think this person has read my books. Like I think she probably has read the books, but she doesn't have, because she's just like a very relaxed, she's like an amazing person, and she really, I think, trusts herself and like thinks that she doesn't need me. Like she doesn't have any questions for me. And that's so great. And I think that's excellent for her. And
that's amazing.
And I really envy it.
Because I didn't think there was anyone on earth who didn't need you.
No, she doesn't. She doesn't. No, one person in my house who has access to me every single day has literally not asked me one question. I'm always like, if you ever have any questions? She's like, I'm good. Everything's great. I don't need you.
That's amazing.
I know, she's the best. She's a totally amazing person.
Well,
all right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you all again so much for coming. Thank you guys for the talk. We have plenty more books up front to purchase as well if you'd like any extra copies, and we'll have you guys posted here for some signing.
Yeah.
Thank you.